Hello and welcome. It's Wednesday, August the 12th, and we are continuing in our series of mini Bible studies as we prepare and look at the readings for the 11th Sunday after Pentecost, Sunday, August 16th, 2020. And today I would like to read for you and give some reflections on the second reading for that Sunday. Romans chapter 11, verses 1 and 2a, and then jumping way ahead to verses 29 to 32. So I will begin with reading the introduction and then the writing of Paul itself. God has not rejected Israel. Rather, the call and the gifts of God are irrevocable, so that while we have been disobedient, God has mercy upon all. Paul writes, I ask then, has God rejected his people? By no means. I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people, whom he foreknew. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. Just as you were once disobedient to God, but have now received mercy because of their disobedience, so they now have been disobedient, in order that by mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. For God has imprisoned all in disobedience, so that he may be merciful to all. So, here we are getting down to brass tacks, I guess you might say. Paul poses a question very bluntly now in Romans chapter 11, verse 1. Has God rejected his people? And I like his equally blunt answer. By no means. Or we might say, no way. Or some people might add some word of profanity before the no, just to show how blunt Paul's denial truly is supposed to come across. By no means. I have covered this theme over the past 2 weeks with these readings from Paul's letter to the Romans, first chapter 9, and then chapter 10, and then for this Sunday, chapter 11. So this topic should not come as any kind of surprise, although Paul treats the questions as preposterous. Still, he makes us consider them, if only just for a moment, so that he can show us how crucial their denial is. We need to know why the question is so important if we are to know why the emphatic denial is utterly crucial for Christians and Jews alike. Paul will have no part in a doctrine that implies that God will not keep promises. If God will not prove faithful to the promises that God made throughout Israel's history, Christians might start to wonder if God will keep the ones that were made through Jesus Christ. The faithfulness of God remains the bedrock of Paul's theology, something he learned early on as a Jew, something he had confirmed through his encounter with Jesus the Christ. So Paul poses the question rather bluntly, has God rejected his people? Now, Paul does not feel it necessary to develop much of an argument here in response to this question. It's pretty simple for him. God cannot reject his people whom he foreknew. And simply because the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. In today's vernacular, we may say, well, that's just how God rolls. He can't be anything different. He has everlasting faithfulness. And it's everlasting, just as the words imply. As a result, Paul can confidently claim that all of Israel will be saved, in verse 26, and will receive full inclusion in God's salvation, as he said earlier in verse 12. Yes, you heard that right, and you may be still wondering, so let me repeat that. Paul writes, all of Israel will be saved and will experience full inclusion in God's salvation. The Apostle Paul wrote it. It is included in the Bible, so therefore it is true. Now, admittedly, tensions weave their way through Romans, chapters 9 through 11. This is a difficult kind of a conversation at the time of Paul all the way through the centuries. There are no easy answers, either from what Paul is writing out for those people in that century or for all of the centuries of people who come after that, who interpret and debate and argue and put forth doctrines and just want to try to put this all in a nice little ball. Because there are very strong claims about God's everlasting faithfulness. And on the other side, there are very less than satisfying revelations about the details of God's master plan concerning the Jews who have not embraced Jesus as Messiah, or Christ as we have called him. Paul cannot neatly wrap this all up into a box and put a pretty bow around it and reconcile all of the arguments that centuries worth of theologians have raised and will continue to raise. And I will tell you, I am at least smart enough not to even try what Paul, the New Testament top theologian and evangelist, could not do. I'm at least that smart. Verse 25 of this chapter, which is not part of our reading for Sunday, although maybe it should be. It reads this way: so that you may not claim to be wiser than you are, brothers and sisters, I want you to understand this mystery. Or maybe better translated, I want you to understand this is a mystery. And let no one claim that I said I am wiser than I am. Rather, I have often told you there are a lot of people out there way smarter than I am. My greatest talent is using other people's wisdom wisely. Mysteries. Mysteries don't sit well with me. Maybe there are others of you that are sitting out there today watching this, listening to this, who are just like me. Just a mystery just irks at you. I'm that guy who's typically trying to solve the mystery before it's revealed. My past mentors and spiritual director often have tried to persuade me just to let God's mystery be mysterious. Probably because, like Paul writes, I should not try to act wiser than I am. God will reveal these apparent mysteries to us in God's time. So we all need to be, that word that nobody likes, patient. Paul's main emphasis once again is on God. The conclusion of these arguments set forth in Romans 9 through 11 comes in chapter 11, verse 32, the last verse of today's reading. We may not be comfortable with this idea that we are imprisoned in disobedience. And we may not like this idea that God keeps us imprisoned, yet the methods by which God works, and whatever the reasons are God has for doing what God does, the assurance we have is that God does what God does so that God may be merciful to everyone. God's ways are not our ways. Oh, if only there were. Not really. God sees what we cannot see. There's a bigger picture than our little lives. Paul wants us to trust God, even when that trust is not an easy thing to give. And the core message of these chapters, 9 through 11, are not to solve the mystery of what will happen to the Jews that do not accept Jesus as Messiah. The core message needs to focus more on God's everlasting faithfulness. God's salvation is less dependent on Israel's faithfulness or even Christian faithfulness, and more dependent on God's faithfulness and mercy, for which I think we should all be grateful. So what have we learned then over these 3 weeks, looking at different parts of Romans chapters 11 through 9? Well, the main point Paul returns to again and again is this: when it comes to accomplishing salvation, everything is in God's hands. Not in the hands of the church, not in the hands of the people of Israel. And honestly, is it not God's hands where we want it to be anyway? Thank you again for joining me today as we continue this journey this week, preparing for the 11th Sunday after Pentecost, August the 16th, 2020. I look forward to talking to you about the gospel. It should be interesting. Have a great day and God bless.